All right, folks should be joining us any moment now.
Nice.
Put down
You go, Jack.
Welcome everybody to the early shower uppers. Is that a word? I think that's an official word I'm going to use. The early shower uppers. The early attendees. That sounds more professional.
Hello.
Okay, I see people coming in. Why don't we give them 2 minutes, Miss Katie? That's all I'm going to give them because we've already shortened the meeting to 45 minutes. We've got so much good stuff that we can't afford to give people any more than 2 minutes.
I agree. I'm just going to be monitoring my email because I know some folks had just a little bit of needed some technical assistance jumping on. But yeah, I think you'll be good to go in a minute and a half now.
Perfect. Thank you, Miss Katie. So while we wait for folks to join us, I just want to notate that we have a couple of additional SEI team members, and I want to introduce them to you guys because it takes like a whole village to operate the MHN. We don't even have everybody on today that has contributed in some way to the Maternal Health Network, but I would be doing my team a disservice if I just didn't recognize all of our team members who are here today. So of course, everyone knows Katie Powell. She's, you know, the wizard behind the curtain and make sure that everything continues to move forward. We have Kim Hopkinson, and some of you guys might recognize Kim because she actually has supported us at a number of community summits. And she's with us today because she is the author, her and Megan, of the communications toolkit that we're going to be sharing with you guys today. So thanks for joining us, Ms. Kim. Megan, you guys have also seen because she's the one that always manages our technology, but she also is the author of that MHN toolkit in conjunction with Kim. And then we also have Marika on board, and Marika has played various roles over the last 3 years in supporting the network, and so she's with us as well. So with that, I've given folks 2 minutes. Yeah, Miss Katie, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. All right, well, welcome everybody to your monthly MHN webinar, where we try to provide you guys with some information and some training about how you can utilize some of the resources that we have developed on your behalf as it relates to maternal health. So we have a couple of objectives to get through over the next 45 minutes. Our primary objective is we want to review with you guys the communications toolkit that we have established on your behalf, specifically providing you guys technical assistance on how to do communications in one of 4 ways: email, printed materials, social media, and then of course, use of your website. And then the second thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that you know how to access this toolkit, as well as a variety of other resources that we have available on our website, and then to explore how you guys might actually be using this to support our messaging. So that's what we hope to achieve over the next 45 minutes. The first thing that we always do is remind you guys, well, why are we doing this? Like, where did the communications toolkit even come from? And it came from you all. So we have put together, of course, our high-level strategic plan. And then following the strategic plan, we put together a very detailed action plan that outlined how we were actually going to achieve what is listed as our short-term priorities in the strategic plan. Ms. Katie, can you throw a link to, well, actually, it's on the website. So if you're interested in the full strategic plan and you haven't yet had an opportunity to take a look at it, Katie will just throw a link to our website in the chat so that you guys can have access to that information. It has the strategic plan, the action plan, and everything we've ever produced on behalf of the network there. So to remind you guys about the action planning, you guys identified that we needed to engage in what we have called information dissemination, and it's specifically around the strategy that states that the MHN will develop and distribute marketing materials that support healthy pregnancy and delivery tips, and resources which can be used throughout the maternal health network. So we identified kind of 3 primary activities in our action planning session with you guys. You guys said, yes, we want marketing materials. Yes, we need a toolkit. And yes, we want to do educational presentations. We think that this kind of 3-pronged strategy would be a really good way to secure consistent messaging throughout the network around topics of interest. So with that, that's what we're going to share with you guys today, is that kind of middle strategy around the toolkit development. And so we established a toolkit that actually incorporates both best practices as well as practical tools that you guys can use to distribute information that on topics that, as I said before, are considered important for the network. And then we are constantly uploading resources, this toolkit being one of them, but also, and I see Elizabeth is on our webinar, we just uploaded the PEI toolkit to the MHN website as well. So all of that just to say that it's not only our toolkit that we're promoting, but we're promoting partner toolkits as well. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to the person who was the driving force behind the communications toolkit, and that is Ms. Kim Hopkinson. So Kim, it's yours now.
Great. Okay, so as Lisa said, she explained why we developed the toolkit, and what we're going to do in the next, say, 10 minutes or so is we're going to walk through the toolkit together. So I'm going to share my screen in just a second, but first we wanted to preface what's in the toolkit. So what it has is best practices and resources for 4 different communication channels, because these are the 4 communication channels that you guys mentioned in some of our summits and our work groups, as these were the ones that you thought were the most effective ways to communicate with your consumers and the families that you serve regularly. So we will go through the resources, best practices, tips for what to avoid, and then also examples of how we've implemented those best practices in development of MHN materials for each of these 4. All right, Lisa, if you want to go to the next slide. All right, so let's walk through this together. So let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. And what you guys should see is the cover page for the toolkit. All right, perfect. Thanks, Katie. All right, so on our first page, we're going to kind of go through this together. There we go. On our first page, we really talk about what is the maternal health network. So we want to make sure that everybody who accesses this toolkit understands the work that the MHN is doing. So we've got that. And then we get into how to use this toolkit. So we provide an overview of why the toolkit was created. Again, it aligns with what Lisa was saying earlier about the importance of connecting families with the information and resources they need to make informed decisions and support a healthy pregnancy. And so you can see here, we've got the table of contents that will direct you throughout the document. One thing to point out on this page is if you look at the very bottom, we have that light bulb icon. And throughout the document, we've got a few places where we call out best practices that are standard across many different communication platforms. So when we're in the section for a specific communication platform like email communications, the best practices there are really specific to email communications. But there's some, such as using standardized materials and messaging, that are great for any communication platform that you're using. So just keep an eye out for those as you go through. And I would say too, as we're going through this, if you guys have questions or there's something you want us to go back to, just put it in the chat. And Katie, go ahead and interrupt me if anything comes up that people want to look at. All right, so let's look at email communications first. So again, we're going to give you a little bit of an overview of email communications, and then we're going to dive right into best practices because we tried to keep this document as concise as possible to make it easy for you guys to use it. So within the best practices, you'll see a list, in this case, 13 best practices, things like keeping your email on brand, using a responsive design, designing an email signature, things like that. And then we give you an example of, again, how we've used those best practices to create our materials for the MHN. And so in this case, this is a newsletter that I'm sure you're all familiar with that Katie sends out on a regular basis. And we've given some examples here of, again, tying back to those best practices. So if we zoom in a bit so that you guys can see it a little bit better, we'll actually list and link to the best practices on the prior page. So number one was having a strong subject line. So we do that here, right? It accurately describes the content of the email and what the recipients of the email should expect. Other things would be things like putting in a call to action. That's the best practice number 10. And so this gives people the option to click on the link and actually access the variety of resources that your organization can use to promote Black maternal health. Again, and because I mentioned the email signature, you can see here a standard email signature that gives people all the information they need to better connect with, in this case, the network, but in your case would be your organization. And then one other thing to note is just that unsubscribe buttons are really important in emails. In some cases, they may be required based on the type of email that you're sending out. So we've given you some information about that here. And as I zoom out so you can see the whole page, you'll see that we've got another one of those standard best practices down at the bottom. So again, as you develop any message, post, any communication, you want to consider your target audience and make sure that your graphics, language choices, and formatting are accessible. And then at the end of every section, so again, in this case, we're still in email communications, we provide some mistakes to avoid. So here we've got 8 common email mistakes to avoid. Things like check for typos, make sure you're sending it to the right person or the right distribution list. I'm sure we've all received emails before that weren't meant for us, so it's always worth a double check to make sure it's going out to the right people. Okay, so we're going to go through that same quick overview for the other 3 communication platforms that are included in the document, because we're going to give you some time in a minute to actually look through it quickly on your own. And then I don't want to give it away, but we're going to do a little bit of a breakout so you guys can think about how you're going to use this moving forward. So for printed materials, we've got some best practices here. We've got 6 in this case. And for printed materials, these best practices sometimes needed a little bit more explanation. So other than how we presented it in the emails, where we just had a number and just a sentence about best practices, here we've got more description. So you guys may want to look through that in a little bit more detail. And then again, we give an example of an MHN developed material, in this case, a flyer about breastfeeding. And you can see, I'm going to zoom in again so you guys can see a little bit more easily how we've utilized those best practices. So things like number 3, our imagery and language is accessible and geared towards the target audience. This is obviously for women that are, currently pregnant or have recently delivered. And so we've got that kind of imagery to make the material feel accessible to them. We've proofread the content and checked that it's free of spelling and grammatical errors. That's really a standard best practice across anything. We probably should have given that its own little light bulb moment in there. And then other things like we've got the inclusion of our website, which will link viewers with digital marketing platforms. So making your printed materials consistent with your digital marketing materials is really important. So establishing that brand across all your platforms is going to be really helpful as you communicate with your families. And then again, some common printed material mistakes to avoid, things like kind of going off brand, not sticking to your color palette, making the text hard to read, using images that don't show up well or that are maybe pixelated can sometimes be a problem. All right, so for our third platform, we're looking at social media. And this section is actually the largest of the 4. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is that there's a lot to know about social media best practices. And then we also know that in today's world, this is one of the primary ways you're likely communicating with your families. And so we wanted to give you a lot of meat around social media. So in this case, we don't just provide you with best practices for creating your post, but we've included some things to think about before you post. This section here could be really useful if you don't have a social media presence yet. So if you haven't established a social media presence, or you're kind of early in establishing your social media preference, your social media presence, not preference, this might be a good list for you to look through. And it's not, it's not a bad thing to look at it even if you are really established. There may be a couple, tips and tricks that you haven't considered. So we've got that. And then we also provide, if you see starting here, some information on what to post. So we give you examples of types of content that tend to be well received, the kind of things that get, for lack of a better word, like lots of clicks, right? Lots of engagement, lots of likes, depending on the platform. And so things to consider are to provide a variety of content. You don't want to just be always giving the same type of content, because it's hard to keep people engaged that way, especially on something like a phone. So consider doing educational content. So that's something where you're really just providing information, educational information. You may want to consider doing interactive content. One of the easiest ways to do interactive content is to ask a question in the post and ask people to engage via the comments. There's other ways to create interactive content. You can embed polls in some of the platforms, but those tend to be a little more advanced. So if you're just starting out, using the chat is a really good way to go. Or not the chat, the comment section. And then the third is visual content. So if what you're posting is just text, it's not going to be as well received as if you include relevant photos, infographics, some other type of visual element. Can really help, even if it's just a picture of somebody doing the thing that you're talking about in the educational content. That's always a good way to put something in there. And then we give some examples of where can you get the content, because that is a big concern with how often people want to post on social media. You want to post several times a week if you want to be establishing a really strong presence that's engaging families. But that's a lot of content to be producing all the time. And so unless you have a social media person on your staff, that might be overwhelming. And so there's a few ways to get that. The first is to access curated content. And that means just leveraging the content that other people have already created. And one of the ways you can do that is to use the content that the MHN is currently creating. And so I'm going to not go into that right now, because we're going to look at it in about 5 minutes when we get to that section. But you can see that we've called it out here, that we provide links in this appendix for you to access social media content that we've created, and that is available for use on your platforms. You can also, again, generate your own content. You want to do both. You want to find a happy, middle ground between the two, but know that there's lots of curated content that you can access on the MHN website, if that's what you would like to do. All right, and then we've got an example of some social media posts that we've recently put up on the MHN Instagram channel. So I will zoom in on that a little bit so you can see. In this case, instead of the best practices, we're talking more about the content type, so you guys can get examples of what that content looks like. So this post actually includes all 3 types of content. So we've got educational content that helps families make informed choices about, foods and other things to avoid during pregnancy. It is interactive, not as interactive as some can be, but it does prompt viewers to click through to the second slider. So you can see this click here. And even that little bit of engagement can be really helpful in getting your viewer to look at the content more closely. And then the third is that it obviously is visual content, because we've done it in an infographic way. And then we wanted to note as well that this utilized user-generated content. So we created this, the MHN created this, but there is stuff like this accessible for you guys that we will look at in a second. Okay. And then again, we have those, common mistakes to avoid. These are specific to social media, and so we'll go on from there. And then the last one we want to look at is website content. And so for website content, we go back to the best practices for developing your website content. What are you going to put on your website? And so we'll look at, for example, the MHN website and how we've used those best practices on our site. So you can see that some things that we're doing are we're keeping our paragraphs short. We're really trying to omit unnecessary language. I will say that is difficult for me. I tend to be very verbose in my writing. And so if you're like me, having someone else read through it is really helpful. And then we've kept the language accessible to the target audience of this page. We've kept important information higher on the page. You might hear it called above the fold. So that's what people can see when they first log in before they have to scroll down. It's from an old newspaper term. Probably people are used to that, right? It's from before you had to unfold the newspaper. That's where all the information, the important information was. And then we've got lots of headers and bullet points and bolding, different formatting to make it more readable and to help people navigate on the page more easily. And then, of course, we have our common mistakes to avoid. Okay, so we talked about the fact that we have content and resources that you guys can utilize and share with your families. We talk about that specifically in the social media section, but we actually have materials for you across a variety of platforms. So when you go on the website, which I'm going to do in a second, there's going to be flyers you can look at. There's going to be social media posts. There's going to be a bunch of stuff that you can leverage and utilize in your own campaigns or your own work. So if you look at Appendix A, you'll see that we've got 12 different topic areas. Now, these are topic areas that were identified by the network as being those that they really wanted marketing materials around or informational content around. And so if you scroll through the next several pages, you'll see all 12 of the topics. Whenever possible, we've noted what a themed month might be. So for example, August is National Breastfeeding Awareness Month. We have a topic area focused around Breastfeeding 101. If you guys are planning to do a campaign around breastfeeding in August, you could utilize the existing materials to do that. And then we say when the content will be available by. So this is a lot of content to generate, and we're going to be generating it over the next year or so. So when you click on one of these links, you're going to get one of two web pages. So let me open up those and show you what those might look like. If you click on something like breastfeeding that is noted as, being available at the time you click on it, you're going to get a page like this that has a bunch of information, including all of those different types of information I talked about before: fact sheets, flyers, additional information, resources from non-MHN produced content. So we're curating content from other people on our own website here. And so you can scroll through. Here's the social media collateral that we've developed that, again, you guys can utilize on your channels. We also have placeholders for where, if you open this as a PDF, you can erase the Your Logo Here section and embed your own logo to co-brand it with us so that people know it's coming from you as well. So, and we'll go into this in more detail in future presentations as these are announced. And so you can see all of this information that'll be provided. So that's what you're going to get for, I think at this point, breastfeeding. The breastfeeding page is the only one that has this level of content on it right now. Now, if you click on something, just to go back, if you click on something like how to support your pregnant family member, advocating for yourself, or accessing your support system, what you're going to get is this page. So under development, just so you guys know, we're working on it, we are developing it, and then we tell you when we think the materials will be accessible. We're hopeful that most of the time it'll be there earlier than what we say, but just in case, we wanted you guys to know when to expect it. And then the very last section of the toolkit is we provide online tools for creating content. So again, we're on the MHN network. We have a ton of resources we hope you guys will leverage. But as you're developing your own content, because we know you will, we've just provided kind of an overview of tools you can use to get photos, fonts, to actually lay out the materials, things like that. How to manage your social media. So we've got a lot of tools here. All right, so I'm going to stop there and turn it back over to the rest of the team, unless there's any questions or anything else you want us to go over.
I'm not seeing anything in the chat, Kim, but I would just invite folks, if you have questions, please throw them in the chat and we'll be able to address them. I will say for my frequent flyers who have joined us for our previous workshops, I think you might know what's coming at you next, which is we don't send you what we review beforehand because we want to teach you how to go on the website and access it. And so we're going to give you a couple minutes to explore. Miss Megan's going to put a link in the chat for you and I made it easy for you this time. It's going to go straight to that provider resources page. Your task is to go and find the communications toolkit that Kim just so thoroughly reviewed for you. And if you want to use it, if you find like, wow, you know, this is great stuff, I'd love for my organization to use it because that's what we developed it for, go ahead and click on it and it'll download for you. So we're asking you to first go to the website on the link provided in the chat. Second, identify the communications toolkit. I'll let you know it's at the top, so it should be pretty easy to find. And then go ahead and download at your leisure. If you want to, we will be going into breakout rooms once everyone's had an opportunity to go to the website. We're going to go to breakout rooms and we have a couple of questions to noodle on how you can utilize this and how we can support you in that. So when you're finished, when you've identified the communications toolkit on the website, give me a thumbs up. You can use the reactions button. You can tell me, Katie, I got it in the chat, or you can turn on your camera like Miss Elizabeth and see your bright, shiny face. Right, it looks like Kanisha, Elizabeth, they were on it. They know the process though. They're frequent flyers with us. So. Okay, Bonnie, you were able to get it. That's great. All right. And so for folks who've already received it, maybe just scan it a little bit more thoroughly, since now you can drive in the document. You can look at what information may be of most value to you and your organization. So start perusing. I'm going to give folks, let's say, maybe 1 more minute to navigate onto the website. Beatrice, I see you found it. Perfect. So it looks like most folks have found it by now. Lisa, do you think it's appropriate to move on?
I say let's move on.
Let's move on. Okay, I want to put actually one more feeler before we go. That on that exact same page, if you scroll down a little bit more, you'll see the new PEI social media toolkit there. You should have received an email from me yesterday about it, but this is kind of your one-stop shop page for resources that we developed for you. Okay, so for, now that you have the toolkit, we are going to invite you into a breakout room with a partner, and we have 3 prompts. We're going to put them in the chat for you, but let's just review them together quickly before we throw you in a room. So the first is, what resource in the communications toolkit did just caught your eye that you think, oh, I could use that information in the future? Is it the best practices, the things to avoid? I know that's something that I find super valuable. So think about, what caught your eye in this toolkit. The second is, do you envision this being a good resource for your organization, and who in your organization could kind of own it and have it as a kind of a quick check guide for either the current content you do for your organization or to help you expand into, let's say, a social media presence or a website. And then the third is, how can we support you in using this toolkit and creating content or making content that we make available to you even more accessible for you? So those 3 questions we're going to put in the chat, but Miss Megan, will you please put folks in a breakout room with a partner?
Breakout rooms are going to be opening right now.
Thank you.
Perfect.
right, so it looks like folks are joining us. Again, I hope you enjoyed being able to just connect with someone other than being talked at. But so while folks are joining back, it looks like just a few folks are still in a breakout room. I'm going to invite you to, because we got to move on. If you identified any area in which the MHN can support you with utilizing this toolkit or supporting your communications efforts, one, where to find me, because I find you every week in an email, at least once per week. But two, throw your ideas of how the MHN can support you in utilizing this toolkit in the chat here, and I'll be monitoring it. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Miss Marika, and she's going to give you a preview of what's to come after this.
Hey, so nice to be with you all today. I'm really excited to share this next piece. So we're talking today about those community education bundles. So we kind of name them as presentations, but there's a whole bundle of information that's available. So at the beginning, you'll remember that Lisa talked about this being a key component of the MHN action plan and that information dissemination piece. And this is really that third primary activity. And we just wanted to preview that this is what is coming down the line to you in our next presentation. And so we're going to be talking about how to use these educational bundles to really provide effective presentations for partners. I think if you want to go to the next slide. And so some of the topics that we have on the queue for you all are, were sort of previewed earlier, but this idea of in July, August, and September, we should have these bundles of information again. So that's the presentation, how to offer the presentation, all of these pieces around accessing your support system before and after delivery, then breastfeeding 101. And so you saw sort of all of the information that was available around that when Kim previewed the page, and then preparing a safe home for baby. And so those are just the topics that are coming up in the next several months. And then you can see down the line that there are a bunch of other topics that are going to be available and all of the support materials to really support you all in providing these educational presentations to the community. And so we just want to encourage you to join us for the next webinar, because we think it's going to be really exciting to share all of this information with you all. I think Megan is going to drop the registration link in the chat for you. And we really hope to see you there on May 26th at 12:15. Join us for sort of seeing what all those pieces and parts of that educational bundle is going to look like. I think I'll pass it back to Lisa.
Thank you, Ms. Marika. And I just want to remind you guys, like, the topics that we have crafted actually came from you guys. So I don't know if you were involved in that action planning session where we actually asked you guys, like, okay, what topics of interest are most important? And we actually gathered this through the course of the strategic planning as well as the action planning sections. So all of those topics were topics that you guys told us were most needed in terms of messaging, communications, and education amongst our target population. So thank you, Ms. Marika. So I hope you guys I hope that we have piqued your interest. I hope that you will be participating in our next webinar. Of course, we always appreciate seeing you guys, but tell your friends and your colleagues and ask them to join you as well. So we have structured this presentation to be slightly shorter than the ones that we've done in the past. And that was really just recognizing that this is occurring during the lunch hour. You guys might need to like take a few moments to gather your food and get settled in before you actually spend some time with us. Having done that, we're asking you though, and we're gonna, close this session a little bit early, but that's to give you guys time to actually participate in our evaluation. So for our frequent flyers, you guys know we do this every single time. We really do pay attention and listen to you and try to adjust our practices to be responsive to you. So the evaluation is something that First 5 San Bernardino is super interested in. I will say last month we only got 2 people to participate in it, so I'm hoping that I can at least double that number this time, if not triple it. It would be super, I would be super happy. But we really do listen to you guys and adjust our practices. So please take a couple minutes. It's very short. It'll take you no more than 2 minutes to go ahead and complete the evaluation for us. And Katie, actually Megan has dropped the link to that survey in the chat box. Click onto it. Tell us what you thought. Tell us what we did right. Tell us what we did wrong. Tell us how we can make these better and more effective for you in the future. And with that, if you have a couple minutes left over, you can just register for next month's presentation as well. And with that, I would like to just, of course, say thank you. It's always an honor to share this time with you guys and to support the Maternal Health Network in San Bernardino County. Have a great day.